call the meeting to order. It's a big day, wonderful day. So with that said, we will is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. I thought, Nancy, that you might have wanted something additional.
Probably would, but I don't think anybody would really want to talk about it. So I don't see the point in asking for a business at the end of the agenda.
Well, you're always welcome to comment. So, okay, I move to approve the agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Ms. Robinson, could you pull the board?
Yes. Member Brown,
Yes.
Member Carpenter,
Yeah,
Member Frazier,
Yes.
Member Mendez,
Yes.
and Member Watson.
Yes.
Okay. And that motion passes. The next agenda item is the adoption of the minutes. Mr. Mendez, Vice Chair Mendez, did you have anything you wanted to say on that?
Well, at long last, we are caught up thanks to Hansel, and so you will find on the website minutes from the last three, and that brings us up to date for 2021.
Okay, very well. Is there a motion to adopt the minutes?
So
I'll
moved.
make a motion.
It's second.
Second.
Very well. Ms. Robinson, could you pull the board again?
Member Brown,
Yes.
Member Carpenter,
yes,
Member Frazier,
Yes.
Member Mendez,
Yes.
and Member Watson.
Yes.
Okay, very well. That motion passes, and the next agenda item is introduction of Mr. Steele. Mr. Aguilar, do you have anything that you want to preface there?
Thank you. Good evening, Chair. Yes. So as the board decided last month, in this January 27th, we're going to have a mock hearing to just discuss a little bit, or excuse me, get our feet wet with the process as the board prepares to have their first live hearing whenever the date is made for that. So my colleague here from Fairfax, Mr. Steele, it was really instrumental. He came to Charlottesville along with me 2 years ago when the initial PCRB was promoting civilian oversight here, and we shared our experience from Fairfax. And Mr. Steele, he was part of the ad hoc commission, the Police Practices Review Commission, which they provided many recommendations to the Board of Supervisors, one which was to establish the Police Civilian Review Panel in Fairfax. And he's been continuing that work after he finished with the panel. He's been doing the implementation of a lot of those recommendations. And he was actually our inaugural chair in our panel. He's well-versed in issues of law and criminal justice. So he graciously agreed to be our mock hearing examiner. And he's just here to present himself and to just give an overview about his experience.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Aguilar. Mr. Steele, thank you for coming to Charlottesville and sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you for inviting me. I am a strong proponent of civilian oversight. As Hansel mentioned, started back in 2015 when there was a very unfortunate shooting, fatal shooting in Fairfax County, and which was not handled well by the police department, apart from the event itself, or the Board of Supervisors. Just the transparency was sort of negative transparency. And that was acknowledged by all the players. And so that was a strong boost of momentum. And so we had speakers from NACOL come, which I assume you all probably know what it is, National Association for Civilian Law oversight of law enforcement, and they came and described best practices to us. We were hampered some by the state of the law in 2015 and 16 as to whether or not a county, opposed to a city or whatever else, could establish any kind of civilian oversight board, much less have investigative authority. So we struggled with that, and we reached some compromises, which I think that the county is now going to look at again to see whether or not it wants to take advantage of the vesting of the power by the legislature a couple of years ago, a year ago, a year and a half ago, to have boards and to invest investigative authority in them. So we worked with that limitation. I personally thought we could do it, but there are other people who personally thought that we couldn't do it. And it just seemed that to try and do it at the time would have just subjected the process to a bunch of lawsuits, which really were not going to get us anywhere for what we were actually looking at. It's for the actual substantive oversight and positive oversight, with the focus on not just the misconduct but review, but also the possible recommendations for improved practices and policies. So that happened. We actually, as you may know, maybe not, we have two oversight functions. We have an independent police auditor who reviews the investigations of fatal shootings, serious injuries, deaths of persons under the custody of the police department, and use of force incidences where a complaint is made. It turns out that the chief of police, both the old one and the new one, also call on him to review an investigation whenever there's any serious publicity in media or the facts are serious, whether or not the chiefs don't wait for a citizen to complain, if you know what I mean. They just go ahead and ask the auditor to just do it and make the investigation. So there's him, and then the panel, okay, so panel reviews for abuse of authority and serious misconduct. And again, we review the investigations, not sort of directly the conduct. We don't review at all the discipline. That may change, and the law permits that to change, but at the time it didn't. So they're about to get an executive director. I don't know exactly where that is, but someone like Hansel. And Hansel stuck around for a while. He might have been the executive director. Knew guys wouldn't be fortunate enough to have him. But we're going to get that. We struggled with, well, if we can't investigate, and apparently we can't review the actual conduct, we can review the investigation. How do we get more investigation done if we see a need for it? Well, it turns out that the way we wrote it, and actually it was my language we put in, the panel can ask the police department to do additional investigation. And that has generally been investigation into the possibility of racial or cultural bias. That the panel thought that the police department had not done, not in a critical way, but just was not really equipped to make those judgments. And the way it works is when we ask for it, I keep saying when the panel asks for it, the police department has to do it. There's no discretion. It just happens. The auditor can also ask for that, but since he pretty much joins in the investigations and monitors as they go along, he can just say, shouldn't we be investigating this person? You know, I mean, he can get it done too. So, but that's not ideal, because you want to have, I think you want to have some ability of your panel or your board to do an independent investigation, more than you wanted to know. But that's about where we are. And I think it's working well. It will be great to have an executive director, somebody trained in investigative and trained in management of this type of activity. So we'll see where that goes. So my own background is I grew up in St. Louis. I went to the University of Missouri. I went to the University of Michigan Law School. Went back to St. Louis to clerk for William H. Webster in 1975 to 76. And then 3 years later, on the day before my wedding, which he was coming to, he was announced to be appointed the director of the FBI. So he flew back and went to my wedding in the snowstorm. So it was a nice little, and he was a big hero. I mean, he was the big, people didn't care about us getting married. It was him at the reception. They came to see. Anyway, so that's about 5 months later, my wife and I moved to Washington, and I worked on his staff for 3 years as a special assistant. And my responsibilities were oversight of the criminal investigative work and the counterintelligence work. So here I am, a 28-year-old guy telling these former Hooverites what I think might be the thing to do. Well, it didn't go out well sometimes. But they tried to call my bluff once with Webster, and he backed me up. And that was the last time they tried to call my bluff. And I kept informed and all that. So oddly, when I went 30 years later, I got on this thing. These 3 years at the FBI carried a fair amount of credibility. So I had a good reputation, and I think I still do, with them. So that's right. And I was a lawyer at a major law firm called Mayer Brown, doing commercial and regulatory work for a major railroad. And I retired 5 years ago, but I still spend about 10 to 20 hours a week doing work for that railroad as the work goes up and down. I had a chance to look at the procedures. If my cat will get off of them, there you go. And she'll show up in a second if she feels like it. The procedures, I don't understand. I'm glad to be the hearing examiner in 2 weeks, I guess, but it's not clear to me exactly what the hearing examiner's supposed to do. And I think that's something you all don't necessarily have to work out for me. You know what I mean? But as I just read it, seeing and knowing how these, as Hansel knows, seeing how these hearings, we didn't call them hearings, we called them meetings. We call them hearings, then we're going to get sued for having hearings. So we call them how they go and how complainants generally approach and present themselves, and how the police department generally presents itself. It's a different police department, of course, but general mindsets are there. So I actually have some sense of that. We don't have anything that looks like the hearing examiner. The chair of the panel runs the meeting and runs the review of the investigation. That may change a little bit with the executive director, who can sort of lead, the panel into it and can identify areas of possible questioning of the complainant and of the police department, and can suggest areas of possible investigation. So right now, until Fairfax County gets that investigative authority, the executive director can just say, here's 4 things we need to have done, and the panel will just ask the police department to do them. And I suspect that if the executive director develops a good relationship with the police department, he or she will just, work on those additional investigation things to make sure they're going the way that the panel wanted them to go, and all that kind of stuff. So if the police department is missing the point, that can all be worked out before you get to the thing. So I think, and the reason I'm raising the hearing examiner things is I read, and I reread them tonight right before this, a lot of evidentiary order of witnesses, this, that, and the other are set by the board, not the hearing examiner. So it's not clear to me what the hearing examiner is going to do. It's not clear to me if the hearing examiner can ask his or her own questions, because he or she, which your criteria for the person being a mediator or investigator or an oversight person, that person probably has something to contribute. I'm not, it's your guys' decision. Your men and women's decision. Guys was a collectively non-gender term. I think that's something that you all have to think about. Do you want the hearing examiner to have to run the hearing? Because all the things I see in the protocols, or the whatever that thing was, are the board making all those decisions, and that's fine. I have no problem, because that's what Fairfax County does until something changes. The panel does it, and if the panel wants to have, there are reasons to have the police department go first, although we fixed that, I think, and that was because the complainant really had no idea what the police department had found except for that, disposition letter, which used to be one line, and now it's not. It tells you a sense of what's going on, but that's not really, telling you the story. So do you want the police to go first so that the person can respond to that? It's been fixed a little bit in Fairfax County because Fairfax County has preliminary initial hearings to decide if it is an abuse of authority or serious misconduct. So if it meets the sort of scope, and that panel will make those three subcommittee members will make a recommendation to the panel to accept it or not accept it. And if it's a recommendation is not to accept, then the new procedure is the complainant can come, even if they're not recommending having a hearing, he or she can come to tell their story. Because we just decided that you can't really, it's a pizza idea to have a process that you never get to hear, that the panelists never get to hear the story of the complainant, even if the motion on the floor is not to have a review, because the person won't know what they can attend the subcommittee meeting too and then hear what the police department did. Oh, you forgot to interview Mary or something like that, so anyway, that's probably more than you wanted to know. That's sort of where they are, and that's where I am, and
Sure.
I'm glad to do whatever you want me to do next 2 weeks from now, but I just need a little more clarity as to what you want me to do. And I'm happy to answer any questions at all you'll have.
Sure, and I can defer to the vice chair. I think the directive for the hearing examiners actually come from city council itself.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, with regard to the rules, you're correct in that we would have to give some guidance on that. But Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Steele. We are trying, as we speak, to fill out an order for the procedure, which would lay out in a little bit more structure what we would hope to have happen in this case, where an individual is appealing or asking for a review of a case that an allegation that has not been sustained. And I think we definitely will. In this case, first off, we're going to have access to the internal affairs file.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to know what's going on to a much greater extent, perhaps, than was the case in Fairfax. And we also tentatively will ask, and I'm speaking only for myself, this draft has not been shared, would have a short summary of the complaint, the investigation, and the outcome from the internal affairs representative, followed by the complainant, and so on. My personal view is that you're a moderator. One of the concerns that was raised during the development of our ordinance and our operating procedures was that individuals would hesitate to come forward or would hesitate to ask for a review if they knew they were going to face cross-examination by a lawyer, a professional individual who might raise all kinds of embarrassing issues and so on. And so
Right.
basically you get to say who asks questions. And you get to determine which questions are you think appropriate. And that's where we are. And I think, speaking for myself, I would certainly be willing to share with you ideas, about going forward over the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, I know. I'm happy to go back and forth. I think Hampton and I talked about this. Fairfax County, all I know is about the IAB files in Fairfax County. And they prepare, and now in a whole lot more detail, a recommendation to the command chain of sustained, not sustained, and a couple other options. And then if it's sustained, what the discipline should be, and people on the way up check that, and then eventually gets to the chief, who has the whole file available to him, but he also has that disposition memorandum, if you want to call it that. And that almost has to exist in any IAB system, or otherwise, what do you have? You know what I mean? You have people do investigations, and then 2 days later, the chief makes a decision. Now, maybe in the old days, that's how that worked. But that's not sort of what folks expect a professional police department these days. So I would think that your hearing examiner would on a routine basis have access to the complaint, disposition letter, and at least that disposition report. That plus maybe the ability to look at any video footage or audio footage should put him or her in a good position to moderate. Do you expect that questions that the board will ask questions directly, or you said the hearing examiner could decide who could ask questions? Decide's the wrong word. Structure who could ask questions and what questions should be asked. So is there some constraint on, I assume all board members can ask questions.
I think this is all, to be worked out.
Okay, all right, but I'm just trying to raise this.
Probably should do it offline.
Yeah, but I'm just trying to raise issues so you know what I think would make it work better. Not yours, but what would make ours work better. And I don't get to tell people how we work ours better now. I've lost that.
Yeah, well, thank you, and I really look forward to working.
Yeah, well, the one thing I would suggest, because next time we'll be a little bit more formal and have to adhere to the hearing that we're doing. You know what I mean? The most useful thing for us has been a strong and good relationship with the IAB command person, generally a major where we are. But that can somehow, one way or the other, that's the person who you want to be not on your side. That's the person you want to be, that you have credibility with, both ways. Because he wants to have that credibility, he or she wants to have that credibility with you all, and you all want him to have credibility in you. And I think Hansel knows this. We've had better and less better IAB liaison persons. We also, in the beginning, we had a liaison who happened to be the same as the IAB person, but then when the IAB person moves a new job, we still had a liaison. So you might think about offering the possibility of a liaison who's sort of not in the formal chain, but somebody you can talk to and, say, are we crazy here? Or are you guys crazy here? What am I missing? And we found that having that kind of person was very, very, and still is very valuable. Somebody you can go talk to, not quite off the record, but you know what I mean, have an informal conversation. Go ahead.
If I could, Ms. Hudson, did you have something that you wanted to add?
Not at this time. I thought I had contemplated just adding at this point that many of Mr. Steele's questions, which are all very well taken, presumably would be answered in the development of board hearing procedures, which have not been developed, or adopted. So the questions are certainly legitimate ones. As I read the current ordinance, the only reference to the hearing examiner right now is that the hearing shall be conducted by a hearing examiner.
Yeah.
And with then a reference to hearing procedures that are to be developed and incorporated by reference into the ordinance. So the board still has that work to do. And I would expect then that for the mock hearing, those offline conversations that you're speaking of having with Mr. Steele and then probably Hansel, and if you wish for me to be involved, we can hammer out a mock set of procedures for the mock hearing, because we're going to have something that we provide not only to Mr. Steele, but to all of you in order to frame the parameters of your hearing and the review related to it. And right now we don't have that.
Yeah. Well, I'm generally available at your at whatever mutually agreeable time we can. I'm sitting home working on the railroad stuff or police stuff. So either our police stuff or your police stuff. So whatever makes sense for you all, and it doesn't have to be fully resolved by the time you're mock hearing, but just sort of try some things out, and I'll do whatever you want me to do. I will not. I will adhere to whatever you say. I won't go off course with, whatever. If you want me to ask questions, I'll ask questions. If you want me to ask no questions, I'll ask no questions. You want me to whatever. So maybe you don't have the full things, you have the big ones, and you see how those work. But whatever makes sense for you all is fine with me.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Steele. I did have a question.
Mhm.
You had mentioned that Fairfax County has essentially two roles: independent auditor and then the panel. And the panel, part of their responsibility is looking at serious misconduct. Have you guys come up with a definition for serious of that misconduct? And if so, how did you go about doing that?
We really haven't. I don't think. I mean, there are a few. When we started doing this, Virginia Beach had a city and not a county, had a panel, and I think they tried to define it, and I think we just stole theirs as a starting point. We've never come back and changed it, but we don't have a definitive. And if today, if we were going to do this with the ability to have investigative authority, I don't think we'd have an auditor and a panel. I think we would have combined them. The one shortfall is those use of force things that I told you about that go over to the auditor.
Mhm.
They sort of don't come, and you get the community input on the things you're often most worried about, which are those uses of force. Because you have the auditor sitting there investigating it, but he's investigating from he was a 17-year investigator trained in uses of force for the FBI Academy. He was training all the people in the country about that. So he's very much that kind of person. He has no input from what the community thinks about it, because he doesn't even have an advisory panel. That's something we forgot. That's something I forgot to do, or we forgot to do. Where was he going to get his input? So yeah, I forgot the original question, but we have no definitions.
You answered.
It's more we sort of develop it as we go.
Very well. Mr. Watson.
As I'm thinking about all this, I'm thinking maybe we could have Hansel reach out to NACO to see if they have any resources or examples that they could share with us of boards that have a hearing examiner. And if, there may be a lot of steps to this, may or may not get you anywhere, but if there's a board out there, that has a set of developed procedures, right, that kind of spells out some of those primary duties in that particular location that the hearing examiner is doing, that might help us a little bit, as we're trying to build it out.
Mm-hmm.
Just a thought.
Very well. Are there any additional comments or questions? Seeing none at this time. Thank you, Mr. Steele.
All right, I will sign off, and I will see you all in 2 weeks. But
very well.
Hopefully talk to you however I can to be helpful. Okay.
Sure, Mr. Mr. Aguilar, is for item 10, the rehearsal hearing legal refresher, is that, is Mr. Steele part of that, or?
No, that's going to be facilitated by Ms. Hudson. She's just going to give a reminder of a
Okay.
refresher of what the ordinance says and what your duties are.
Okay, very well. Thank you, Mr. Steele.
All right, one thing I do, real quick, I think there's a lot of confusion on the Virginia FOIA and what can and cannot be disclosed. We've pretty much taken the position, actually got the county's attorneys to agree to it, that personnel files and investigative IAB files can be released. It's a discretionary release. There's no mandatory requirement that you can't release those. Now, the police are going to discretionarily decide not to disclose them, and that's a different issue. But I would encourage you, because we've struggled with it for a long time. I'm sure Ms. Hudson has expertise and knowledge about that, but it's not a particularly clear thing, and you can catch yourself up on that with and get people mad at you. Just a heads up. All right. Well, I will sign off. Thank you all very much, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks or before if you need me. Thanks. Bye-bye.
The next item on the agenda is the election of officers. And Ms. Hudson, you can, or if you would, if I'm, off base on it, pull me back in here. So at this point, per Robert's rules, I understand it's, nominations can be presented. I guess we will start with the nominations for the chair. Is there anyone that would like to make a nomination? Seeing as none,
I nominate Ms. Hudson. Ms. Hudson, be our chair and leader.
Qualified.
Oh, yeah. Overqualified.
Chair Brown, you should ideally call for nominations from the quote unquote floor about 3 times to ensure that folks who may be ruminating about a nominee have the full opportunity to consider it and perhaps chime in if they would.
Sure, I believe that am I precluded from making a nomination from the chair as well? I believe that was an option. I wasn't cutting it off. I wasn't cutting it off.
I'm sorry. I thought you were trying to end nominations. Excuse me.
No. I was going to make my own. And for the chair nomination, I nominate Vice Chair Mendez for that role.
Second.
There's for the nominations, there doesn't
okay.
need to be a second. Are there any additional nominations? Mr. Watson, I see your hand is raised. Is that?
Oh, I think I never unraised it. You
Okay.
think I know how to use Zoom by now, right? 2.5 years into a pandemic.
Well, are there any additional nominations for the role of chair? I believe that was 3 times.
You may declare the nominations closed for chair.
So the nominations for chair are closed. Is there, given that there's only one nomination, is it necessary for the vote to take place?
Yes.
Okay.
And you might want to solicit all nominations for for all offices and then take your votes in series.
Okay.
I mean, just to keep the nomination process going, then you'll have a slate.
Sure. So the second would be nominations for vice chair.
I'd like to nominate Mr. Watson for vice chair.
Okay. Mr. Mendez, I saw your hand.
It would have been for James.
Okay. Are there any additional nominations? I believe on this particular one that twice seems to be sufficient. So at this point, the nominations are closed. And we will go ahead and do a formal vote for the position of chair. Ms. Robinson, would you poll the board?
Yes. Member Brown,
Yes.
Member Carpenter,
I have struggled very much to determine how I would vote tonight. I don't know whether this board will have a conversation, but to think about the terms flying monkeys and identifying low-income neighborhoods as projects, going after someone's child, hoping that one of our other female board members does not show up and then discounting if they do. You're asking me to vote in a system that has supported this, that has not held itself accountable as we want to hold our law enforcement accountable. And it's really been a struggle. But I have to be true to what I believe in, as we are all on this board true to what we believe in. And so therefore I will abstain from voting for either chair or vice chair tonight. Thank you.
Very well. Thank you, Ms. Carpenter. Sorry, Ms. Robinson.
Member Frazier,
Yay.
Member Mendez,
Yes.
and Member Watson.
Yes.
Okay, so that Mr. Mendez becomes chair with a majority vote. So the next voting is for the position of vice chair. Ms. Robinson, would you pull the board?
Member Brown,
Yes.
Member Frazier,
Yay.
Member Mendez,
Yes.
and Member Watson.
Yes.
Okay. Very well. So congratulations, Chair Mendez and Vice Chair Watson. And I elatedly turn it over to you, Chair Mendez.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your service, Bella.
Thank you.
Mr. Trail, I think it's time for public comments. Is he there?
Oh, hi.
Oh, sorry.
Machine. I'm coming.
Oh, Machine,
right
I'm
now,
sorry.
it's okay. We have Katrina Turner. I'm gonna allow her to talk. Hi, Katrina. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Yep, we can hear you perfect.
Yes, I want to speak about what Miss Carpenter just spoke about. And I want to know why the board isn't speaking about this. Not just did Mr. Brown talk about the community members, he also continues to talk about Mr. Aguilar. He still does not have respect for Mr. Aguilar. And then to see you all vote and vote the men in again, what in the world is wrong with you all? Even if Nancy did not accept the chair or the vice chair, why couldn't one of you all nominate her or nominate Miss Gilmore? Why do you men have to be the ones in control of this board? Because see, there's a problem, especially with the ones who agree with Bellamy, that us, the citizens, are flying monkeys. What in the world is going on? What kind of board have you all formed? Because this is not what we fought so hard to get here in Charlottesville. I did not be threatened by the former Commonwealth attorney to sit here and look at what you all are doing to this board. How many of you all feel the way Bellamy feel? Because I feel right now this board needs to be dismantled. Because I do not see where you all, aside from Nancy, care for what's going on in this community. I see that you just feel you're in this position and you think people are gonna keep praising you all for what you're doing. But you have to, something needs to happen, because this is just ridiculous. For this man to be able to call us flying monkeys and still be on this board and all y'all agree, and he still does not respect the executive director's position. What's going on? What's going on? That's all I'm gonna say for right now, but you all need to think about what you're doing with this board. Thank you.
I've been asked to comment on this particular space, so I will. This notion of me speaking directly about a specific community member in reference to flying monkeys is absolutely incorrect. Did not identify anyone. I stated the current climate or the previous climate of the city of Charlottesville as it related to the dynamics that were going on with regard to narcissism and with regard to those that were enabling narcissism, and its impact on the community as a whole. In addition, I believe that, and Mr. Aguilar and I have had, good conversations, and I actually recently did a WINA interview where I had mentioned the good work that Mr. Aguilar is doing. So these false notions that are out there, particularly from a subset of the community, that's just what they are. They're false. I believe that if we look at what took place during this year as a whole, there's an ordinance there that wasn't there in 2019. So this idea that that we don't care about the community and all these other things, those are fallacies, and they're just not true. So that's what I have to say about that.
Next up we had Andrew Shelton. Andrew, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
We can. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you all for your time. I just wanted to call in and say that having read the full extent of the FOIA communications, I personally don't believe that the board really is going to be able to have much respect in this community as long as Mr. Brown and Mr. Frazier are on the board, based on the apparent collusion that I saw in those text messages, which they seem to be under the impression were not FOIA-able, as we found out that was incorrect. And I think that they should both step down. Additionally, I would also like to say that I find it kind of disturbing that Mrs. Gilmore has not been able to be present for quite a few meetings now. As I recall, the last time it was discussed directly, there was some issue about her ability to charge her electronic devices or have access to the internet. And it seems inappropriate to me that a voting member of this board has not been given whatever additional assistance she needs to be part of this process. Thank you for your time.
As of right now, I don't see any other hands raised. Oh, one just popped up. We have Ain Khan. Hello, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
No problem. You have 3 minutes.
You're welcome. So first, I want to start off by saying that Bellamy Brown is totally gaslighting the community at this moment, and is only addressing the flying monkey situation, rather than addressing the fact that Jeff Frazier and himself avoided or attempted to avoid the FOIA process. In one instance, they also tried to prevent public speaking during a public process. So that's just two of many instances that were FOIAble. So I would definitely be in favor of them to stepping down. This process of having a fully functioning PCRB, which obviously we know is not going to be possible, is just being what is it called? It's being interrupted and being packed with police apologists, former law enforcement, folks who have a soft spot for law enforcement when they need to make decisions regarding the conduct of law enforcement officers. It does not make any sense at all. And that's all I have to say right now. I would like to know if at the end, when you have public comment, if there would be an option to speak again. Is there an option at the end?
Mr. Chair, if I could make a statement.
No, yeah, I mean, if you raise your hand, you have an option to speak at the end. It's a public, there's, yes.
Mr. Chair, if may I make a statement?
Let me say that my own personal opinion is that engaging in back and forth and tit for tat with commenters is widely known not to be a very good way to run a meeting. I'll stop.
Well, I was just simply going to point out the fact that I've never been in law enforcement. I'm not I've never been in law enforcement. I think there's a lot of misinformation that's presented. I've never been in law enforcement.
Are there any more comments, Latrine?
No, there are not. There are no other hands raised at this time.
Mr. Aguilar, could you tell us about the status of complaints?
Yes, thank you. Since your last meeting, and I apologize, my other screen blanked out. 1 second. So since your December meeting, you received one initial complaint, 0 review requests, and 1 closure letter. And the initial complaint was made by a complainant who self-identified as American Indian female, who expressed that she was in an incident where she was exposed to excessive use of force in November of 2021. So that complaint is going to be investigated by the police department. And the review requests, as I mentioned, there were none, but the closure letter was regarding a complaint where an individual mentioned that he wanted a review request initially. Then he withdrew that request because he was working with a commander within CPD to get his concerns addressed. He has now received a closure letter, and it did sustain one of his allegations. And so that would, under the current ordinance, be ineligible for review, unless you brought up another issue that he had that that was not sustained.
Any questions or comments about the status of complaints?
I have none.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is the development of standard operating procedures. As you are aware, the current ordinance calls for the development of standard operating procedures that define the relationship between the police department and the board, which will now be the Civilian Oversight Board, with regard to information sharing and confidentiality issues. As we noted at our last meeting, the city attorney had volunteered to meet with Consul and with the interim police chief and to provide a draft SOP for us and the city council to review. And has there been any progress on that, Consul?
The last email regarding that or conversation, I shared it with you and the city attorney, Ms. Lisa Robertson's. That's something that she's going to lead the drafting process of both the standard operating procedures and the operating procedures. There is obviously going to be input from the board and before any final approval of those, but that is something that on the current city process is facilitated by the city attorney.
And so basically there's going to be a meeting soon.
Yes, I don't have an exact date, but that is something that we're discussing.
Okay. Any comments, any other comments or questions on this? Okay, the next item is our internal operating procedures. Again, we also need to, just as we thought as we were drafting the ordinance, we were going to need some detailed operating procedures that would deal with, for example, hearings under the new ordinance, investigations, and other powers that we have been given. And like the standard operating procedures, that process has been kind of in abeyance over the holidays. What I propose that we do, and this certainly is open to discussion, is that we try the approach that worked so well for the ordinance, which is to have a team or a work group composed of 2 members from the board to start soliciting comments on issues that are not very clear in our ordinance that need to be clarified in the operating procedures, and to hear comments also from the public on that regard, and hopefully so that very shortly after our ordinance becomes effective on March 1st, we will also have operating procedures for the city council to vote on, and then we will begin to have the full powers defined under the ordinance. Any questions?
Bill, I've got a question.
Yes.
You want to solicit, I think, which is a good idea, some feedback from the public, on what our operating procedures could look like versus, what we've had up to date. But are we really going to expect the people that invested their time with the my board colleagues on the ordinance itself and the hearing procedures to really want to be a part of what's going on right now? Just throwing it out there. I've heard feedback that some folks that participated with my colleagues earlier may not want to be associated. So hopefully we can find some other folks that might want to step into those roles and assist with that.
Actually, I have been discussing this with an attorney from the Legal Aid Justice Center, who has said that she would be delighted and happy to participate in the development of the operating procedures.
Good. Well, she would be an excellent, excellent addition to that group to provide those kinds of comments. I certainly would support that.
Okay. Any more questions?
Mr. Chair,
Jeff, yeah.
I don't know if this comes under internal operating procedures, but it turns out that when I inquired of the city attorney regarding who was our FOIA guardian, in other words, when we submitted just, a data dump of all the requested information, typically what happens is there's somebody that has the responsibility within city government to go through and make sure there's not personal information and personal reference in any of the documents, and that didn't happen. The whole dump went out, and the whole dump got posted to compromise some privacy on the part of people that were communicated with. It had absolutely nothing to do with board business. And she said that A, it wasn't her job, and B, we needed to have a FOIA guardian. The person who handles the FOIA request is a clerical person. It's not up to them to go through and make a determination about what should be included in the release and what is not. So I don't know if tonight's the night to discuss that, but it doesn't, and maybe Ms. Hudson can weigh in on this, but I really feel strongly, because there was some privacy compromised in that data dump, that there's a guardian in place, as I understand is standard procedure. Is that correct, Ms. Hudson?
My experience to date with respect to the protocol for responding to Freedom of Information Act requests directed at records and proceedings of this board has been in consultation with Lisa, the city attorney, to first and foremost, that we're to understand that the city protocol applies, and there's not a different protocol for the board. And with respect to the city protocol, the FOIA officer, as you mentioned, has merely administrative responsibility and not substantive responsibility for deciding whether and what is disclosed and for applying any exemptions that may be applicable, since those are legal determinations. That said, what Lisa and I have talked about is that I am or can be the reviewer of documents that are collected by you all as the receivers or custodians of them, to let you know which ones, in my legal opinion, are responsive to the request, are not public records within the definition under FOIA, which may be withheld in your discretion, not mine, under any applicable exemption. For those decisions then to be made, and what is agreed by you all to be produced in consultation with me, go to the Freedom of Information officer for response.
Okay.
A letter is drafted to indicate what exemptions are being asserted and what part of FOIA allows that withholding, or to state simply that here are the responsive documents, or we're withholding this number under this exemption and it's approximately this volume, and here's the reason. All of the possible responses, quite frankly, that can be made under FOIA are then made following that review. You all may recall that there was a series of Freedom of Information Act requests to the board in, I believe it was around September, October timeframe. And at that time, Mr. Wheeler, who was the FOIA officer, sent those requests to me and asked me to perform that role, which I did. I did not receive the request that you are referring to, Mr. I did not even know it was in the House, Dr. Frazier. So, and I just attribute that to there just being a transition in that role at the time, rather than
That's essentially what happened, Ms. Hudson. Mr. Wheeler had left his position, and I think it fell between the cracks. But I just wanted to make sure we had a mechanism in place. Sounds like we do. And that the Go ahead, Mr. I'm sorry.
It sounds like it's loose. It's not well defined at this point, and I think that, and I'm still exploring this, but there is a risk management issue for the city, and I think that this has to be addressed properly, because it's out of control. So,
I had thought, one of the ways, speaking of FOIA, was that we could have, as a general rule, in each board meeting, a guest speaker on a special topic related to police oversight. And I thought that perhaps maybe our first guest could come from Sans Anderson, and could take a half hour or so to tell us about and ask all our questions about FOIA.
Absolutely.
It's clearly a huge issue.
Certainly, absolutely
And
prepared to
so
do that at your request.
We, I think that we absolutely need to have, discipline within our organization, and the safeguards regarding FOIA exemptions as well.
Because it became clear to me that the recipient of the FOIA request had no interest in protecting anyone's privacy. They just dumped it all on the internet, and it was very unfortunate. And I regret that it fell between the cracks. But I mean, it happens. But the cat's out of the bag. Obviously, there was no willingness on the recipient's part to protect anyone's privacy. So I would agree, Mr. Chair, that we should have it visited, and then also address Mr. Brown's concerns about the risk factor involved with the release of personal information in the process.
Agreed.
And I guess we shouldn't, I guess it's a lesson learned from this particular dump of public or of records that has happened. It's interesting that I would be sitting here not knowing certain things and trying to work through those certain things so that I can continue during the remainder of my time of my appointment to try and do something, hopefully with the wave ending, and maybe in this spring, perhaps we'll have a different type of medication that will deal with some of these virus variants, so that so many of us can get back to the things that we want to do and have kind of pulled back from those things, so that hopefully we can talk about in the operating procedures when we talk about community engagement, which is something that I'm passionate about. I've often said from the beginning, I'm not a wordsmith, and I appreciate the details that the folks on the ordinance work group and the hearing work group went to try and present, some initiating documents so that this board can get to the work that it, is trying to do. We have that mock hearing coming up, but it is good to know that there are some things that need to be addressed so that we can reestablish or try to establish any type of trust that we can have amongst each other. Because there will be, we do have openings. We will have people that will have expressed interest, maybe will express interest, and hopefully want them to see a functioning board and not one that is sniping and snarking all over the place. And we need to, work on that. And it's a big lesson learned for me.
Well, I agree. We really, strongly need to address our internal divisions. And, the more we're on the same page in terms of, respectful communications, and so forth, the easier that will be. But you raise a very good point.
I'm all about calling a spade a spade. I've been the whooping boy for the past year, so.
Nothing personal there. No, nothing personal. I'm just saying.
So I'm
Yeah,
not sure
James?
how we're leaving it in terms of the FOIA issue. I mean, are we going to just, for the time being, send any data dumps to Ms. Hudson, and then proceed that way and then try to tighten up the procedure per Mr. Brown's concerns, Mr. Chair?
Well, I think I would, I mean, Hansel and I can put our heads together, but I think I personally, hearing what happened, I would probably just send off an email to the city attorney complaining.
I already did.
Well, and I'll do it too. And let's not let this happen again. So.
Once again, I'm sorry.
Yeah, James.
Oh, go ahead, Ms. Hudson.
No, I was just for clarity, in response to Dr. Fraser's question about whether or not there would be a FOIA presentation or FOIA training that you wanted me to present. I just wanted to be clear in terms of what the direction is. Is that something you'd like me to be prepared to do? And do you want me to talk with Lisa about just confirming my understanding that it is her expectation that PCOB FOIA requests be reviewed by me in terms of the documents that are gathered, so that I may at least give you the benefit of my thinking about how to apply your exemptions and the various definitions and other factors that go into evaluating a response to a FOIA request.
With regard to
because that way staff will know to send them to me once they're received, so that I can be on the lookout for the documents that are gathered and then make sure that I receive them so I can perform that function. I just wanted to make sure my expectations were, your expectations of me were clear.
Well, first, with regard to the training session, I'll get my head together with Hansel and James, but I think, yes, we definitely want to have a VA FOIA orientation at our next meeting. And B, I think it's kind of the approach that you suggested of having you to be our, in effect, our guardian. If it proves to be workable, it would be great. Fine with me. I think that's an excellent approach.
Likewise.
And again, just that was the approach that the city attorney contemplated. I think it's just a matter of that not maybe being clear in the transition of the FOIA officer more than anything else.
I mean, part of the problem is that, just in day-to-day exchange, you don't often think, oh, this is going to get FOIA'd. I mean, and so in one instance, I caught myself and indicated to the recipient that I was going to send it through a different route because it had nothing to do with PCRB business. But other than that, I was just, I mean, I don't always think, gee, is this personal or is this board?
Well, that's the kind of thing that I'm happy to address in that segment that you've asked for. Unlike others of us who have been public servants and subject to FOIA as public officers for many years, private citizens have not been, and so it makes sense to perhaps orient you more comprehensively about FOIA and its operation.
Please.
Yeah, it's much more wide-ranging than you might think of intuitively. So if you don't want somebody else to see it, don't put it down on paper or in electrons. That's really
lesson learned.
I'll prepare a presentation that is very succinct but comprehensive.
Thank you.
Thank you. James, I think still didn't speak.
All right, yeah, I'm kind of.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. And this was not really on the agenda, but one of the areas that I'd like to really get us kind of moving more strongly is, community engagement, right? I love people. So yet I've been a part of this for quite a while, but we've been deeply into a pandemic the entire time, right? It's kind of hard to say whether it's getting better or worse, or we just kind of learning to live with it. But I would like to see us by at least the third week of April, when it gets warm outside, to be at least part of some existing events that are going on in the community so that we can sort of begin to make those connections. I've been around 30 years, so I know people all across the city. And I think we all have our different connections. So it's a matter of now getting with those people and finding those opportunities. Now, Hansel, you mentioned a couple meetings ago that you were working on some things. So if you're able to give us a little update, I know that's not on the agenda, so sorry if I'm once again breaking good old Robert's rules, but just want to see what you've come up with. Thank you.
Sure. And thank you for that, bringing that up, because that is something that has been expressed by the different community members and also by yourselves. Actually, last month, and we're getting our feet wet in terms of what we can do and trying to be mindful and respectful of the restrictions because of COVID. Last month, Dr. Frazier and we had the opportunity to table at the Grand Illumination event. We didn't have any set brochures that had been pre-made, but on that particular day, we distributed some that I had made that had the information of the board. And it was a relatively good event. We distributed a lot of literature for the families that were present, and we had some candy and toys for the kids. So those are the things, and absolutely, like you're saying, that we want to do and we can do. Last night, I had the opportunity to do a presentation to the Youth Council. And we get in that discussion with the city's youth, making sure that they're aware of this process. I had a meeting earlier this week with the liaisons, the diversity liaison for the school board, and also with the parent liaison. So we're trying to make inroads that way. The reason why I think that strategically it made more sense to begin a really robust outreach plan after your ordinance, it was because it might be confusing for community members. It's like, hey, we're PCRB now, we're going to PCOB. So it's a little bit confusing and you might miss opportunities that you don't have the opportunity to go back. So I do have something drafted, and I'm happy to share it with Mr. Mendez, Chair Mendez, and yourself and the rest of the board. And I also have and I'll keep promoting the idea that I think you have really good tools to do some good outreach with your advisory panels that you're empowered to do and your committees. And I think that we really can utilize these tools, have potentially neighborhood advisory panels. So we have the geographical representation of the community being part of these discussions, and they could report back to the board. So we can do a lot of neat things with the way the ordinance is written.
That sounds helpful.
Kind of just babbling here for a second. But yeah, in the springtime, there's a lot of different events that happen in Charlottesville. Of course, people are outside, and I think about groups like Prolific Run Club. I've only gone out there and run with them one time. I can't claim I've been out there a whole lot, but just thinking about maybe setting up something, even with that group in the morning. Have you followed those guys and girls, the Prolific Run Club? They're bringing people together, Black, white, folks that, have never run a day in their life, and, maybe making some ties with a group like that or anything similar in the area would allow us to be sort of kind of backtrack a little bit. And like you said, prior to now, we didn't really have we didn't have any teeth, right? So we, you go out, hey, we're the Civilian Review Board or Civilian Oversight Board, but we really can't do much, But even though I'm kind of babbling here, but yeah, I think we need to really, knowing that the warmer months are coming and people are going to be outside, we got to make those connections. So yeah, I'll be in contact.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree, Mr. Vice Chair. I think that is a excellent opportunity to diversify the voices that are in this particular area. And I think that you would have a broader representation of the African-American community in particular, as opposed to just a single subset. I know that there are a lot of voices out there that don't necessarily feel that they are represented at this point. So I certainly would agree with that.
Oh, the last thing, I'm just throwing them in there. We got to get this other position filled, and I don't really know exactly what that takes. But, I trust me when I hear the comments about, I still look around and see an all highly male board, which I respect all you guys, very talented men and lady. But and I know we can't say who needs to be on this board, but I mean, we're not very diverse. Straight male, we got to get that position filled, and hopefully it's somebody that adds some diversity. Not that you all aren't diverse, but I think we just can't keep going along. And I know I've been kind of in the background for several months, and I appreciate you guys bearing with me. But whatever we need to do, we got to try to get a solid person in that slot.
Yeah, I think,
Mr. Watson,
give me a second. Yeah,
Yes.
I know that, James, we've discussed this in the past, and I'm sure we can keep discussing it, compare notes, and find.
What's the initiation point? Do we say, hey, city council, can y'all start reading those resumes? I mean, we hear people who applied multiple times. What makes that happen? I'm on this.
That is something of a mystery, actually. And so it's something we'll need to talk to. Yeah, go ahead, Bellamy.
If I could point out that Councilor Payne appears to be in the audience, if Seville Communications could promote him, maybe he could speak to that.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, the process for that is just council reviewing the applications as they come in and making an appointment. This has been a board position we haven't received very many applications for. I believe there were 2 total, and one of the individuals did not get back to us to schedule an interview. And so I think the biggest challenge on our end for council is just having that advertisement of notice that there's a position to be filled being circulated in the community and getting applications, period. And just my perspective, I think that's the biggest challenge on our end, is there haven't been very many applications to this board.
If I could add, Mr. Chair, just to let everyone know, they may not know, but in the new ordinance, it provides for city employees to apply, provided they are in no way affiliated with the police department. So I think that's going to open up a bigger pool of potential applicants. I know one person who applied actually lived in the county and wasn't aware that that was a requirement. So maybe Mr. Payne could speak to that as well. But it does mean that we have a potential larger pool of a larger pool of potential applicants. Excuse me.
Yeah, and I guess you pretty much covered it, but that change was made. We've had I believe 2 applicants in the past who were considered but did not qualify because they worked for the city. So yeah, I mean that pretty much covers it, and I think it will probably also require on our end and council, as well as potentially the board, reaching out to folks, including folks who have maybe applied in the past, to see if they're still interested in serving on the board, as well as trying to go out and just, again, recruit as many applications as possible.
Mr. Payne, is it generally the case that a lot of boards are struggling to recruit applicants, not just ours?
It depends on the board.
Okay.
This is definitely not the only board that has had an issue of not having very many applicants, or having applicants who don't qualify because they either live in the county or don't meet some other requirement. So the board is not unique in that regards. Obviously an elephant in the room is just that it's been a very charged and difficult time for the board. And I know that, potentially could deter applicants if they don't see it as a stable board that they feel they want to participate in. So I think changing that perception through action, some of which had happened, including, updating our ordinance with independent investigatory powers, subpoena power, auditing powers, et cetera, is a signal that the board is serious and able to function. But I think continuing to change that narrative is going to be key to getting people who want to serve.
That's a little bit of a two-sided coin, though, because I think having a more diverse board that is not so highly male, will help us, get to that point too, right? Like, and I mean, there
No,
was
agreed.
yeah, there was an
Agreed.
applicant.
And I don't put that out there as a reason for not
Right.
filling the vacancy. I mean, the bottom line is this has been vacant for too long and council has to fill it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Parker applied at least twice, and I guess because, I don't know, why council wouldn't have approved her, seeing as how that seat was vacant for a long time, well, for many months before she applied. I mean, that was one person. Now, I don't know who else has come on. I did see the information about the lady that Mr. Frazier was talking about ended up being a county resident, unfortunately. But I mean, you've had people apply, and I don't know what their lens is about wanting to put somebody on the board, Michael, because you are our liaison. I don't know, maybe you can put a little fire, when these applications, when you're advised that these applications are in is there a committee that reviews the applications, or a subcommittee that reviews the applications, or you all review it as a council as a whole? Thank you, Mike.
No, we just review them as council as a whole.
Okay.
We have regularly scheduled appointments to boards and commissions, and normally we review them in closed session and then determine who's on every board. And in a case like this, that falls outside of that normal application period, so we won't need to wait until that comes around for all our boards and commissions. But again, it's just council as a whole deliberates in closed session and then chooses candidates and then announces it at the council meeting.
Okay. Thank you, because that probably maybe cleared up for some of the people in the audience, like what the process is. Maybe they're thinking it's more onerous than it is, and could encourage some people to apply, I hope.
And not to keep I don't even like using the word dead horse, but I do think that there was an applicant that actually made it onto the board and it was retracted, who was a city resident, but at the time you couldn't be a city employee. That person may have been a bus driver. I don't want to give out somebody's details. They may or may not be interested, but from what I saw, it seemed like it would be a really good addition to the board. So
yes, there were two applicants in the past who were considered but didn't qualify because they were city employees in I believe bus driver and social services.
Okay.
Yeah, we can move on. I was curious about those items.
Yeah. Okay. The next item on our agenda is a legal refresher with regard to our mock hearing. And I think Cynthia Hudson is on deck for that one.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. And Hansel and I have kind of talked about about the nature of what this refresher is. And I'm hobbled by a couple of things as he and I discussed. And that one is that I haven't seen yet, although I know Hansel's going to give it to me, the actual mock scenario that you all will be considering. And also and two, we don't have procedures that I can kind of tie in to this refresher discussion. So it'd be very basic, very high level. And that's what he and I talked about. And a third one occurs to me, and that is that this is a bit far removed from the date that you'll actually be doing the mock hearing. So Hansel and I have talked about just making some general reminder type comments tonight, and then providing you something in writing that you can actually refer to as you receive the materials and prepare for the mock exercise. So with those preliminaries, I would stress first and foremost that as a general matter, as you go into the mock hearing situation and making it as realistic as it is supposed to be, that you consider the emphasis that the ordinance compels you to bring to this on professionalism, fairness, impartiality, and objectivity in your role as fact finders. It's not clear yet whether or not you are going to be conducting a hearing in connection with the review of a completed IA investigation where someone has requested that you review the finding, or whether or not you're going to be conducting a hearing in connection with your own investigation of an incident or complaint. But either way, there's some general rules that apply to the expectation that your role is to rigorously test the accuracy and the reliability of all of the information that's presented to you, whether it's testimonial, whether it's documentary, whether it is video or audio evidence. It's all factual in nature and to be tested against what is reasonable in terms of its credibility, its authenticity, and its reliability. You're to consider the facts presented and reach factual findings and conclusions that are based on the merits of what you've heard without regard to your personal lens or beliefs or concern for your own personal, professional, or political consequences. And certainly another general caveat is the necessity of your maintenance of the confidentiality of the information to the extent it's required to be maintained confidential by law. There is some question as to whether or not in the real world or in the mock scenario that you will be privy to information of that nature, such as matters involving juvenile activity or other such matters that will be controversial with respect to your receipt of them and certainly your use of them. Hansel and Lisa have developed a confidentiality agreement that you will likely be expected to execute in connection with your receipt of any such information, so you should expect that. We've talked about the fact that the hearing examiner's role has not been clearly defined yet, but it'll be developed, as I understand it, between now and the 27th so that it's clearer for the purposes of the exercise. I wanted to speak too about the role of PCOB counsel, myself or Cullen at Sands Anderson. And that is, obviously, we are not involved to prosecute a case regarding the misconduct of or alleged misconduct of an officer, but to be there in an advisory role to you all as fact finders and to the hearing examiner, so that if a question about the legality of a particular set of circumstances or the criminality of a particular set of circumstances or the legal import of something that you're hearing is in question, Cullen and or I, whoever is assigned to the proceeding, would be prepared to advise you on that on the spot if we're able to, or to let you know whether or not it's something that would need to be researched and brought back to you. Also, to make sure that you recall that there's a standard of review, we sometimes call it a standard of proof, that's involved with respect to your review of the evidence. And while the procedures haven't yet been developed, certainly most of the procedures that I've seen from other jurisdictions where they have developed them, the standard of review in your fact determination has been a preponderance of the evidence. And there are varying standards of review. You've all heard the standard of review or the burden of proof, for instance, on the prosecution in a criminal case, which is to prove the elements of a crime beyond a reasonable doubt. That is not the standard here. There is also a standard of proof called clear and convincing evidence, which sometimes defies very clear definition, but it is but both of those standards are higher than the standard that we will likely be employing here, which is that of a preponderance of the evidence, which essentially means the greater weight of the evidence. For example, based on all of the evidence, is it more likely than not that the conduct that is alleged to be misconduct in violation of CPD policies and procedures or general orders or law, that it's more likely than not that it occurred or that it did not occur? And that is kind of the zipper clause, as you put it, on what the foundational goal is for you as fact finders in this process. Is it more likely than not that the conduct alleged occurred? And if it did, is that conduct in violation of Charlottesville Police Department policy, procedure, or training, or local, state, or federal law? And
Ms. Hudson,
go ahead.
is there a subjective or an objective standard there? Are there elements to arrive at that point?
You should weigh the evidence with an objective lens, as I stated in the opening comments. And it's designed to be an objective standard.
Mm-hmm.
You are assessing to some degree the reasonableness of what you hear in terms of whether or not it's reasonable to believe, for instance, a particular piece of evidence that's presented to you as fact. You get to test whether or not, weighed against your common experience and the other evidence presented, whether that seems true, whether witnesses, if they're allowed to testify, are in your reaction to them, are they telling the truth? And those are things that it's hard to assign an objective standard to, but that's the province of a fact finder. Judges are fact finders if a jury is not involved. Juries are fact finders. So the exact same processing
Mm-hmm.
that a juror is allowed to bring to his or her evaluation of evidence in a court proceeding,
Mm-hmm.
you bring to this as a fact finder. But you are the ultimate determiners of what is factual or what's more factual than other evidence that's presented relative to it, and then looking at all of the evidence that you find to be true and correct
Mm-hmm.
in your reckoning. Is it more likely than not that a violation of policy, procedure, or law occurred on what you've heard?
Mm-hmm. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
So typically jurors are provided instructions to kind of set those parameters. Is that something that would be done here, or
to the extent there are general orders, policies, procedures, or legal standards or requirements against which you are measuring these facts?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you'll be provided that, because that's essentially what jury instructions are.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the law that applies to what you've heard.
Mm-hmm.
These are the elements of the crime of X, if it's a criminal trial. And you have to assess whether or not all of those elements have been introduced in this proceeding, with evidence that was admissible, and you are to assess whether or not all of those elements occurred and that constitute a crime. And I'm just saying that as an example.
Sure.
But essentially, that's what jury instructions are. They're the judge is telling the jurors what the law is against which they're measuring the factual evidence that they've heard. And yes, you would know that. You would know exactly what policy is alleged to have been violated and what kind of elements establish violation of that policy. But it's going to be more of a factual assessment than a legal one in this situation, because we're normally going to be dealing with evaluation of evidence to determine whether a policy violation occurred, which in some circumstances may also be a legal violation. And again, just from a high level, I've talked about what my role is and assisting the hearing examiner and you as the board as you evaluate evidence and hear evidence. So we talked about the standard of review or burden of proof. And then there are other details to be sussed out. Mr. Steele alluded to some of them, and we'll be working those out. And that's the order of proof, or the order in which the case is put on, which is not to be determined by me, but those are elements to be wrestled with here and determined. Will there be opening statements? Will there be closing statements? The form of questions, how stringent will the hearing examiner be allowed to be with respect to the form of questions that you may ask, keeping in mind that this is not a court proceeding and that the goal is to get to the truth in a way that satisfies the public expectation to do justice and to do and to operate in a fair manner with respect to the complaint that's been made, and certainly to provide a fair opportunity for any officer who is alleged to have committed misconduct to have clearly put on the evidence that that he or she wants to present in your assessment of their conduct and whether or not it's violative of policy. So with that said, you're not likely, I would expect, in the manner in which these procedures are ultimately determined to really be held to the same standard as lawyers are in a court of law, in terms of no leading questions and no argumentative questions. There are some boundaries that will need to be drawn that you would expect the hearing examiner to call balls and strikes on, so to speak. But you would not expect there to be a strict application of the formal rules of evidence, for instance, regarding hearsay and very technical other rules of evidence, which usually do not apply in administrative hearings such as this. This is not a legal judicial adversarial proceeding. This is an administrative proceeding regarding the conduct of an employee and the performance of his or her job. That is probably as much of a general nature as I can share with you at this point, but I wanted to give you a flavor for what kind of information I'd be giving you and putting it in writing that you could use as you sit there and as you prepare for this mock proceeding. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much. It just, like everything else that this board does, we're kind of charging toward the finish line at the last second. And so there are a lot of loose ends that have not been tied up. Most of the loose ends have not been tied up. With regard to the nature of the hearing, we've been talking to internal affairs to have them generate for us an old file, essentially something that occurred a long time ago that is not that is simple. As I understand from Hansel, the file that they're contemplating sharing with us involves a single allegation, and that allegation was found to be unfounded. So this will be a review hearing. This is not an investigative hearing. We're also working on an order of the proceedings, as we discussed a little bit earlier with our examiner, and we will be sharing this with the board as soon as it becomes somewhat more refined, which hopefully will be in the next few days. I understand, Hansel, that maybe by early next week we may be allowed to review a file.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. And I spoke with Lieutenant Gore, who heads the internal affairs at the CPD. They have selected a case, and as you indicated, it is a one allegation case, one subject officer. So the reading is relatively light in terms of the actual review. We talked about a schedule to allow the board to review, and right now we're potentially going to have another snowstorm, so that may give you a little bit less time than ideally. But if there's no major inclement weather, the review, the case file review would be able to start on Monday, and you'll have the opportunity anytime between Monday through Friday, leading up to the 26th, or the day right before the review hearing, to go to internal affairs and review the case file. We worked it out so you can go 2 at a time. And that way it won't be a public meeting and you'll be able to review it. Their hours are from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. And then I know some of you have full-time jobs. If you're unable to go within those timeframes, with enough notice, we can try to work out hours outside of that. So if you can start thinking about the next 2 weeks, your schedule, if hopefully Monday we could start, if not Tuesday we could start. If there are any issues with transportation or anything else that needs to be worked out, please let me know as soon as possible. Ideally though, we would facilitate these review sessions through internal affairs, and we'll make sure that we work very closely with the board members and their schedules. For us, it was a big challenge. In Fairfax, is a bigger county, so sometimes getting over to internal affairs was difficult. The city's a lot smaller, but I know that there are other factors too that can impact your ability to get there. But if you could just start thinking about your schedule from the 17th to the 26th of when you'll be able to go review that case file, that'll be excellent. And again, we'll get a little bit more clarity tomorrow. I'm going to touch base again with Lieutenant Gore.
Mr. Aguilera, Monday is a holiday. It's Martin Luther King Day. Does that impact the access?
Excuse me. Yeah, it is a holiday, and it is a holiday, so that would impact, and also the potential snowstorm. So definitely think about from Tuesday to the 26th. If you can carve out some time there. If you don't think you'll be able to meet go to the internal affairs between 7 and 4, please let me know as soon as possible so we can try to work out time outside of those hours.
You cannot take the files out, obviously, but you can take notes. And that would be a really good idea.
And so you're going to give us a ride?
I absolutely could give you a ride.
You pick people up.
Yeah, the city has a Nissan Leaf, which I'm a big fan of. So
Nice.
I like riding it. If you need a ride, please let me know. I'll go pick you up. But if I can, real quick, it just provide a little bit more insight, and I'll share the links too of what our deliberations look like in Fairfax. They're going to be a little bit different. But take nothing for granted as you're charged in reviewing these cases. Look at the thoroughness, and we had a lot of robust discussion in Fairfax, what it meant to be thorough and complete and accurate and objective. To me, there were instances where the police department, IA, failed to interview one particular either witness of an event, and they still decided, based on the evidence, that there was no misconduct there. And we had discussion amongst ourselves whether that was sufficient based on the weight of the evidence. I felt that if there was somebody there that needed to be interviewed and wasn't interviewed, that you can't call that something complete or thorough. So these are the kind of things I want you to when you look at these case files, look at who they're interviewing. Did they interview everybody that they possibly could have? Did they ask all the questions when they were doing the questions of the complainants or the witnesses? And look for anything also, any opportunity to give recommendations. And even if it's something like maybe they didn't record an interview, that was one of our early recommendations. All interviews needed to be recorded. And there were instances where not all of them were recorded. So these are the kind of things that you could think about when you're reviewing these case files.
You know what, Hansel? If you're able to create us just a cheat sheet of, hey, here's some key 5 items, 10 items to look for. Could you do that?
Absolutely do that. And you'll also have Ms. Hudson. She's going to create a more elaborate legal one, but I can, from a reviewer's perspective, I can give you like what are the things that I was looking at. And I think that was also the challenge. Sometimes some of my colleagues were looking at something. We didn't have a baseline. We looked at things in different ways, and you saw that in our deliberations. One thing that I do recommend when you come to the point of report writing, and we won't necessarily do it for this mock hearing, but when you do reports, there were instances where I just didn't agree with the votes of my colleagues, and I felt very passionate about my stance on it. And we built in an opportunity to write a dissent as part of the. If you dissented from the majority opinion, you were able to write why you voted against it in your explanation. I think that's also important to be part of the public record when you're communicating with the community.
And another thing to remember, an important thing to remember when you're looking at the file is that we, in a review hearing, we can agree that the facts, the investigation is complete and the IA decision was correct. We can disagree with the facts that were reasonably available to the internal affairs. Or we can say, this investigation is not complete and does not enable us to judge the validity. So, looking for completeness and as counsel says, for important elements of information that are not there or ambiguous, that's going to be important. So stay tuned, and you'll certainly get lots of communications over the next few days regarding the march toward the mock hearing. Any other questions? Okay, LaShawn, I think.
Councilor Payne has his hand up, Mr.
Oh,
Chair.
sorry. Oh,
no worries.
Pardon?
Yeah, I wasn't sure, the best time to chime in with this, but we'll just say this as a final thought, and I appreciate the update, and might be a little bit of a tangent, but just, I know that myself, and I think I can speak for all of council, are going to be, watching the mock hearing closely, as well as, watching the pending hearing under the existing ordinance. Again, I think I can speak for all of council, as was discussed earlier this meeting. There's a lot of concern to just watch and ensure that the board is able to function together as a unit. And, once you all move on to doing your work that you have the power to do under the ordinance, that you're able to operate in a way that seem as legitimate and trusted by all stakeholders. And as everyone knows, it's still just a new board. I think all of council sees a lot of risks in terms of as a new board, wanting to ensure that you're able to function and have longevity. And again, just watching closely to see that, because I think, again, as was discussed, if the board is not able to function as a unit, there's just a lot of risks. And I think we all share the goal of ensuring this be successful and having the full powers of the ordinance. And just a friendly reminder, I know we're all on the same page in this, but if the board is not able to be successful and do these things in a professional manner, the people who are going to be sitting back and smiling and winning are those who don't want to see police oversight, and those who didn't want a police review board, and certainly not a police review board with subpoena power, investigatory power, et cetera. So a little bit of a tangent, but just wanted to put it out there that council is watching this very closely and just wants to see some assurances that some of these board divisions are able to be overcome.
Thank you. A word to the wise from Councilor Payne. Appreciate that. Okay, now I think can we poll the audience for comments?
No one has raised their hand yet. Oh, they're starting to pop in now. Okay, first up we have Angie again. Hello, can you hear us?
Yes, thank you. Are you able to hear me?
Yep.
Are you all able to hear me? Okay,
yes.
So first of all, I'm going to start out by saying this. There isn't a member on this board who could go toe-to-toe with me, any other commenter or activist in this community during a debate, whether it be for pro-PCRB or anti-PCRB or any other community issue or concern. Okay, so I want to make that clear. In your emails, you mentioned board members, council, and the ordinance. I could read it for you all if you wish. I could read every single one of them publicly. This info is public, and it appears what you're trying to do is avoid being held accountable. That's the same very process you're expected to do with officers who have had complaints filed against them by community members. With that being said, the info that was released was not private and absolutely did contain PCRB info, which is accessible via FOIA. So you can stop trying to blame everyone else but you for your behavior and take responsibility for your actions. And that's all I have to say. I don't expect a response because, like I said just in the beginning, none of you on that board can debate me. So please, I am begging you, for the love of the community and those who have worked tirelessly to establish this board and who have faith in this board, step the hell down.
Next up, we have Andrew Shelton.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciated Councillor Payne's so-called, he called this himself, tangent there. I thought that it really got to the core issue here. I know that all of you on this board have put a significant amount of time and effort into it. You know, I say that even if I have called for the resignation of a couple of you. And I would just like to ask how you see this going in the future after the mock hearing and the one that's on the docket. If there is not actually enough community trust that any future police accountability issues that need to be brought before you, if the folks in this community are not willing to do so because of the membership of the board and the way that this is played out, I really think that there needs to be some internal discussion about whether that's really sustainable, as Councillor Payne said. Thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, I don't see any other hands being raised.
Mr. Chair, if I could make a comment.
Go ahead.
So with regard to what I've seen regarding community trust, I believe that there has been an uptick in the number of reports that have come, particularly from the Black community. I understand that there are some in the community who speak for some, but don't necessarily speak for a lot of the others that are in their community. And those voices aren't necessarily being heard. And I hear more of them who do develop trust and do appreciate the work that this board has done and continues to do. And I personally will continue to advocate on their behalf because they do appreciate the work that's been done. And that's all I have to say about that.
Mr. Mendez, if I could.
Certainly.
Then where are those people at? I mean, we have folks that are called the subset of the community who have shown up month after month after month after month and have provided us with public feedback on a variety of issues. I want to hear, Mr. Brown, those folks that you say don't feel like their feedback is being listened to, because I want to hear their lived experience. What is their, I mean, I'm hearing experiences from specifically folks that, some of them that have come to our meetings over and over are the ones that went down to Richmond, stood up, sat down at the witness tables and gave testimony along with other activists throughout this Commonwealth that resulted in the law that we're now creating ordinances and hearing procedures and standard operating. If it wasn't for those people, we probably wouldn't have what we have right now in this Commonwealth, which is currently going to be under attack now that our General Assembly has convened. Don't know how that's going to suss out. That is a bill that we should all be watching as it makes its way through the Senate, and if it through the Rules Committee. So I strongly encourage you, since you seem to be the liaison for folks that have that viewpoint, to encourage them to show up at at our meeting. Maybe they come in at 7 o'clock, and if it's 6:30 is too early, maybe they show up 7:30, 7:45, when we're doing our second round of public comments, and ask them to please share what they see and how they feel, so that those comments can also be weighed against the other comments. Because you say there are, and I don't doubt it, but I don't hear them. And I'd like to hear them, because that would certainly broaden the lens of what we're, where we're at and what we're doing to create that model, everybody's working hard to do. So please ask them to, either email all of us, their thoughts and feelings, because we do have a listserv for all of us there, or to come. I certainly would encourage them to come, just as these other folks are coming. So I don't know if you can relay that, or if there's a way to make that more public, but let's hear from them.
That's a perspective that's taken under consideration. I think that what we could see here is, just as the same demographic that I guess you work in and operate in may not necessarily have a favorable impression of who I am, that same deal may be the same case for the people that I operate in. And if we go to the point of, if a tree falls in the woods and there's no one there to hear it, doesn't make a sound. Just because you don't hear their perspective, it does not mean that their perspective is not valid. Just because they aren't one of the 7 to 8 that show up at every meeting, it does not mean that their perspective is not valid. We live in a city of roughly 49,000 people, and a good majority of them are African Americans. So to say that, the subset that, that you encircle represents, all those African Americans, I can tell you 100% it's not true. So by all means, and I'm sure when the community engagement gets rolled up, you'll see more of them out there expressing their perspective and their views. Will they necessarily say that to you? I don't know, but they will be out there expressing those. So you can't just discount them just because they didn't go down to Richmond, or because they aren't one of the 7 to 8 that show up on this particular meeting.
Absolutely nobody's discounting them, Mr. Brown. I'm just inviting them to, I'm sure that had we not been in this damned pandemic for as long as we've been, that you're right, we would have had those meetings where folks could show up within their neighborhoods, much more conducive and much easier to do, correct? To show up in your neighborhood and be able to have, conversations with us, like that, with two of us, I guess, or whatever, unless we want to do a traveling board show. But I'm not discounting anyone, and I don't ever think I speak for anybody in the community. I speak for myself. I would never represent myself as speaking for the low-income community at all. That is, those voices were Ms. Johnson and Ms. Gilmore. Those are those voices, not me. So I think that I'm well aware that there are a lot of folks that are on lots of the spectrum of ideas and everything, and that I would wish that I could hear more of them personally, because relationships are important, and personally be able to engage. And I'm hoping that, as Mr. Watson says, that we get closer to April, and maybe we get through this, that we can have those relationship building moments that we have not been able to do, unlike other boards that have been impaneled for many years and, have some of those relationships built. That's what I was talking about. No way do I talk for anyone, not even the subset. So, I just hope that we can move and get those voices here, because those are important. You're right. They're absolutely important.
I hate to interrupt here, but we are at the end of our allotted time. I'll make a quick point.
Mr. Chair, could I just have 2 seconds, please?
Certainly.
I just wanted to correct, there's a faction that has implied, if not stated, that my use in the text of the term flying monkeys was somehow racist in nature. And I just wanted to put on the record that it has absolutely nothing to do with race. It has everything to do with a reference to the movie The Wizard of Oz. It's about folks that are loyal to a certain leader and who do their bidding. It's a term in my profession that we use to describe a certain process. The best example I could give would be our former president and the people that surrounded him and supported his belief system. So I just wanted to clarify that I would never use that term in a racist context. I would never use racist language. I abhor it. And that those that think it was racist, please go Sunday to the Paramount and watch The Wizard of Oz. It's being shown for 25 cents. Thank you.
If I could add, briefly, I'm the one who made that inception, and I made that inception based on the psychological information that's out there regarding narcissism. That is a psychological term. I didn't even go to the movie point. And then at that point, Dr. Frazier in there. So there was no race involved at all. I made the inception because that's when you look at narcissism and you look at the whole gamut, that's the terminology, the psychological terminology that's utilized. There's no race involved. You got black folk, you got white folk, you got all kind of folk that are in that space. There's no race involved. This is a professional psychological term that is utilized when it comes to narcissism.
I see that Michael Payne has his hand raised.
Time to wrap this thing up. We got to wrap this thing up.
Yeah, and I won't try to drag things out any longer, but just want to interject to maybe suggest I'm only speaking personally, my 2 cents. It may be of use perhaps for the board to think about having a board retreat at some point to perhaps talk through some of these disagreements there are, because I think we all share the perspective that it's not going to be ideal for some of these conversations if they haven't been had to emerge during a hearing or to remain unsaid and undiscussed and worked through. And in just my 2 cents, I think a board becomes functional. There's always going to be disagreements. There's going to be votes. You might be on a winning side, a losing side. But the critical thing is everyone to have open communication. And even if you disagree, to have a baseline of respect and understanding for what everyone's saying. And so again, I would just interject, perhaps it would be worth considering a retreat or discussions outside of these meetings to try to work through some of these disagreements that are emerging. And I'll stop there and not say anything more tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second.
Ms. Robinson?
Member Brown?
Yes.
Member Carpenter?
Yes.
Member Frazier?
Yes.
Member Mendez?
Yes.
And Member Watson?
Yes.
I guess we are
Congratulations to our new chair and vice chair, and gratitude to everybody for all the work on the ordinance. I think we did a really good job with that, and I'm excited about the new year.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Good night.